Hi guys, it's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zicree of Space Command. And I just posted recently one of my favorite movies, Things to Come, and hopefully you've watched it because we're going to do a commentary on that entire movie in a few minutes. But first, several things. First off, we're doing a Kickstarter campaign to finish more Space Command, to shoot more Space Command, to get more Space Command to you. And we're starting to fall behind a little bit, so we have to clear $1,000 a day. There's credits that you can have, co-producer, associate producer. You can come on the set. You can get all sorts of cool Space Command stuff, books and posters, and yeah, you name it, everything, downloadable stuff. Tons and tons of things. And if there's a Space Command perk that we haven't listed, let us know and we'll add it and you can get it, and then we can all be happy. So but that's just a little thing. And we're also selling Space Command shares at $7,500 and $37.50 for a half share, and you get a portion of my Space Command profits on the first 4 episodes of the show when it sells. And so very cool stuff. But in the meantime, let's talk a little more about Things to Come. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I would urge you to see the movie before you watch this video because, we're going to be doing a lot and saying a lot that makes sense if you saw the movie. Now, I want to show you 2 cool things before we go on to more fun and adventure. First off, this is a drawing I did of the lead character, Cabal, Raymond Massey, in Things to Come, and I drew this when I was about maybe 17, something like that, and so it's really cool. And then the other thing, I mentioned on the previous video that originally the villain that's played by Cedric Hardwicke in Things to Come, Theotokopoulos, was originally named after El Greco. That was his real name, his Greek name. And initially Wells envisioned him as tall and thin and ascetic, and it's sort of like, well, that doesn't fit that guy. He's stocky and blustery and so forth. And the reason is because originally they cast a totally different actor, and his name was Ernest Thessager, and he played Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein just before this movie, before Things to Come, and he was a wonderful actor. He was 6 feet tall and thin and just amazing, amazing. So I finally tracked down a photo of him in the role of Theotokopoulos in Things to Come. Now, Wells, there he is, and boy, I'll bet he was great in it. And Wells felt that his performance was too gay, quote unquote, which is very funny because Wells had this high little voice. If you ever go on YouTube and type in H.G. Wells, you'll be able to hear what his voice was like. But it was sounded sort of like he had helium from a balloon or something. But so they recast Thessager. But of course, the terrible part of it was they didn't tell Ernest Thessager they'd recast him, and so he brought all of his friends to the premiere in London. And it was only when the movie was done that he realized he had been cut out of it. So. But I'm really thrilled to have this extremely cool photo of him. Thank you, eBay. And I'm also going to contact some of my friends in England and see if there's any footage of him in that role. I've never heard about any footage turning up, but on the other hand, 40 minutes of Metropolis turned up after 80 years being missing. And also they did a great documentary on the I, Claudius film that Charles Laughton starred in that was never completed, and I highly recommend that documentary. It's probably here on YouTube as well. So before we get to, I'm going to basically sit down and go through the entire movie of Things to Come as an audio commentary and talk about it and discuss how things were done and all sorts of things. And but before that, I mentioned that there was a lost scene in the film, and because Margaret Scott, who wonderfully plays Roxana, the boss's main squeeze, his Goyle. She's terrific in that role, but Wells initially conceived of her in a secondary role as a character called Rowena, and although she's pictured on the lobby cards and in the ad copy, she doesn't appear in the movie. But Wells published the screenplay in book form, and we have that entire scene. So Elaine and I are going to enact it vocally, and I'm not going to get into the big, Cabal outfit, but you'll be able to hear the scene. It's a bit of a groaner, admittedly. It's Wells was certainly of his day, and though he believed in free love, which was sort of like open marriages and things like that, and he had many affairs as well as several marriages. Anthony West, who was a very famous writer, was actually his illegitimate son with Rebecca West, a very famous writer of the period. But so this scene, which I think probably it was a good idea they cut it out, this scene shows his relationship, Oswald Cabal and his ex-wife, talking about their daughter who's about to be shot to the moon. So again, if you haven't watched the film, watch it. And we're going to do the scene right now. And then we'll do the commentary on things to come. So let me set the scene for where this deleted scene takes place. In Things to Come, there's the scene where Oswald Cabal and the descendant of Passworthy talk to their respective daughter and son, and Passworthy's trying to talk them out of taking this mission that is so dangerous. So then it continues to, and this is the book, of course, Things to Come, published in 1935. The movie came out in 1936. And it says, evening passes to twilight, after sunset glow in the sky. A terrace with clipped yew trees, new type of yew, looking out over a wide landscape with the sea in the distance. Standing out against the sea is a huge, heavy, mortar-like structure. This is the space gun. It is our very first sight of this. It crouches monstrously, dwarfing every other detail in the landscape. A certain mistiness enhances, if anything, its portentous dimensions. An aeroplane sweeps down and its shadow passed across the terrace. A momentary glimpse is given of Cabal descending from the plane he has flown to this place. Then the camera returns to the terrace to await him. Cabal enters and walks slowly to the terrace balustrade. He stands musing, looking at the space gun. His hands are behind his back. So he remains for some moments. He turns at a footfall, and Rowena enters. Rowena is the descendant of Roxana, the favorite of the boss of Everytown in 1970, just as Oswald Cabal is the descendant of John Cabal. She is physically like her prototype. The part is played by the same actress, but she has none of the arms akimbo dash of her ancestress. She is better bred. She is dressed much more beautifully and with nothing of Roxana's sluttish magnificence, and her gestures are well under control.
And so, at last, I am permitted to see you again.
You heard the news quickly, Rowena.
It is all over the world now.
Already?
On the air everywhere. The whole world talks of nothing else. Why have you done this thing to me? Our daughter.
I did not do this to you. She determined to go. What do you want with me?
You're a monster. You and your kind are monsters. Your science and your new orders have taken away your souls and put machines and theories in the place of them. It is well I left you when I did.
And you have come here. You have insisted on seeing me in order to tell me that now.
Not only that, I forbid you to send our daughter on this mad expedition.
Our daughter, my daughter. You left her to me when you went away, and she goes of her own free will.
Because you have poisoned her mind. She, I suppose, is one of the new sort of women, just as you are one of the new sort of men. Do you think I do not care for her, simply because you have never let me see her?
Usually you have been on the other side of the earth, love hunting.
Reproach me. All the same, I care. And who left me love-hungry? Cabal, have you no pity? Have you no imagination? If I cannot forbid, well then, I implore. Think of that body of hers, scarcely more than a child's body, crushed, broken, frozen.
I won't. One can think too much of bodies, Rowena.
Hard you are, and terrible. What are you doing with life, Cabal?
Soft you are and sensuous. What are you doing with life?
You turn it to steel.
You fritter it away.
Who made me fritter it away? I have been wanting to meet you face to face for years, and have this out with you. I hated leaving you, but you made life too high and hard for me.
I hated your going, but you made life too distracted and vexatious for me. I loved you, but loving you was an all-time task. I had work to do.
What work?
The everlasting work of fighting danger and death and decay for mankind.
Fanatic! Where are danger and death today?
In ambush everywhere.
You go out to meet them.
I had rather be the hunter than the hunted.
But if you are hunting danger and death all the time, what is there left of life?
Courage, adventure, work, and an increasing power and greatness.
Give me love.
You left me for that, poor love huntress. My love wasn't good enough, not flattering enough, not sedulous enough. Have you ever found that love of your dreams? Was there ever a lover who made you feel as glorious as you wanted to be? Could any lover do that? Wherever you found love, you gripped it as a child plucks a flower, and you killed it.
Have I been anything but human?
No.
I have loved after my nature, even if at last I have to grow old and die.
But let me live after my nature. You may want love, but I want the stars.
But love too. You wanted human love once, Cabal.
I wanted my work more.
But isn't that girl of ours at least human, as I am? Isn't she entitled to the freshness of life, to the novelty of life? Is she to begin where you leave off? Suppose, after all, love does come to an end, gets found out. Why shouldn't she have her years of delusion and excitement?
And in futility? Left behind by all your loving, painted in an imitation of youth, clinging to passion?
Oh, you can sting. Which of the two is futility? To obey your impulses or deny them? That girl, I tell you, is a human being, and she has to follow the human way. She's a woman.
Not one of the old sort, Rowena. Not of your sort. Do you think that everything else in human life is going to alter, scale and power and speed, and men and women remain as they have always been? This is a new world we are living in. It drives to new and greater destinies, and that desperate old love story which has been acted and told so often, as though it was the very core of life, is almost finished with.
And you think she has finished with it?
What do you know of our daughter? What do you know, you love huntress, of the creative drive a woman can feel as well as a man? She has loved and she loves. She has found a mate and they're driving on together, shoulder to shoulder, almost forgetting each other in their happy identification. She lives for the endless adventure as he lives for the endless adventure, and that is the increase of human knowledge and power forever.
Cabal, all men are fools about women. All of them. That girl of yours and your endless adventure. You think she is a new sort of woman. There is no new sort of woman. She flies off with her lover. Well, what sort of woman wouldn't? Old sort or new sort? What could be more glorious?
Anyhow, she shall fly off.
The new sort of man seems to me to be very like the old sort of mule. Now tell me, if men are going to give themselves to this everlasting adventure of yours, what is to become of women?
There's no sex in that sort of adventure. It is as open to you as it is to us. Drop the old sex romance. Come and work with us.
Work with you?
Why not? You have the hands and the brains.
You mean, my dear, work for you. There speaks the old sort of man asking woman to be his slave. When it comes to women, is the new sort of man any different from the old?
Why for us and not with us?
Because you men have a way of taking the lead and getting hold of things.
Very well. For us, if you like. And why not? Pick your man for the work he does and the powers he has. Follow him and be his woman.
We women, are to help and comfort and cherish. Play the role of handmaid to the end of things.
If that's how you are made, and it seems to be how you are made, why not?
It isn't how we are made.
If you are not made for knowledge and power as men are, if you are not made to serve knowledge and power, then what on earth are you made for? If you are more than a love huntress, what do you dream you are hunting?
We argued like this 15 years ago.
15 years ago. This argument began before the Stone Age.
And it will end. Will it ever end?
Never for us, Rowena, never. For generations yet. You go your way after your fashion, and I go mine.
And that is your last word for me. You who once knelt at my feet.
Old memories come back to Cabal, a rush of forgotten emotions. He turns toward her. He seems full of things he cannot express, and he says nothing. Fade out of the two, facing each other in the twilight, man and woman, bereaved of all the illusion they ever had for one another, and still perplexed. I hope you enjoyed the scene that Elaine and I did, summoning up the spirit of H.G. Wells from 1935. It was a scene that was shot but cut out of the film before its release, but it survives in the lobby cards, etc. And I've just shown you, of course, the artwork that I did of Things to Come and that great photo of Ernest Thessager as Theotokopoulos. And if you've just watched the full film of Things to Come, you've seen what Cedric Hardwicke did with the role, and you can draw any conclusions. If you go online onto YouTube, you can find Ernest Thessager in Bride of Frankenstein as Dr. Pretorius, and you can kind of get a sense of what his performance in Things to Come probably would have been. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a full audio commentary of things to come, just going through the entire movie, talking about it, and bringing and highlighting some of the details of it. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, our Kickstarter campaign is still happening. We're trying to raise $48,000. We're up to $26,000. We're about at the midway point. We want to finish the hour of Space Command that we're doing visual effects on in post. We want to continue into the second hour that we've shot that hasn't been released yet. There are 2 more hours waiting just to be completed with visual effects and so forth. And we're prepping to shoot the hour after that, building sets, creatures, all that stuff. So if you've been watching Mr. Sci-Fi and enjoying it and haven't ever pitched in to help make all this stuff happen, please, there's a link to the Kickstarter campaign. If you can throw in $100, $1,000, $10,000, that all helps enormously. We've got great perks. So again, check it out. And so now, without any further ado, we're going to watch things to come together. So you see that they start with H.G. Wells' name because he was very, very famous by 1936. The books that he had written in his youth, Time Machine, Island of Dr. Moreau, Invisible Man, First Men in the Moon, etc., War of the Worlds, were all huge classics and were consistently in print from when he had written them. They had not gone out of print at any point. And you can tell from the style of the titles that this is intended to be an important film. And the music is booming, and there's Arthur Bliss's score is terrific. As I mentioned, it was composed before the film was shot, and so and then the action was edited to match the music. But the music is terrific, and it's really stood the test of time. And again, this is a film. Wells had written The King Who Was a King, which was sort of a silent movie script and not really good. But this was really the boiling down of all of his philosophy. Now you can see the cast: Roxana and Rowena. Margaret Scott is credited as both, and the child Anne McLaren. It's great stuff. Great grandfather Charles Carson. These were all very accomplished performers. And it starts in 1940. Now the film came out in 1936. Hitler was on the move, the Spanish Civil War was going on, Italy was under fascist control, and there was a sense of the coming war. And so 1940 was 4 years hence, and I'm sure for all, and although they call it every town, it's obviously London, with St. Paul's and so forth, with the double-decker buses. It's Christmas time, and this is a brilliant counterpoint between Christmas with the holly and the tree and the toys, and the threats of war, the headlines of war coming, and people essentially not noticing that, walking by those headlines as they grow and grow and grow and grow. But for Londoners, they were desperately trying to not go to war. And Neville Chamberlain, who was Prime Minister, in 1939, he came back, peace in our time. He had met with Hitler, and then it was clear that Hitler was just using him, playing him for a fool, because he then invaded Poland after invading Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland and so forth. So Hitler was embarked on world conquest. But this shows what life pre-war in London would have been like, in England. You've got these cinemas. If you go to London, there are still these Art Deco cinemas that are very reminiscent of the scene that you see here. And again, anyone watching this would have known that this was exactly London. Christmas turkeys, all of this. This opening has a very Christmas Carol feel. And you see these children, and again, counterpointed against war. And so it's like a cloud hovering over everybody. And at this point, Wells not only was known as the great science fiction writer of his youth, and he'd continued writing science fiction novels over the ensuing decades, but that was not his principal focus, because then, of course, he became a mainstream novelist to success, and then a huge and popular historian and social commentator. So in 1919, he'd written Outline of History, and so a lot of that deep research into the history of the world informs this film. So it's Europe is war, all these war headlines, all these scares, and then we go from that to the headline, and we meet Raymond Massey's character, John Cabal. And again, we get a sense that he's an aviator. There's a print, there's a picture on his wall of an airplane in flight. This is the doctor that we'll meet later, and he plays a very good job. He does a very good job of playing a young man here, and then an older man in the later section of the film. And of course, Raymond Massey is this great lean and intense figure. He had played Abe Lincoln in Illinois. He later would play the father of James Dean in East of Eden. He also appeared in Night Gallery, Rod Serling's Night Gallery. Now there's the character Passworthy. So essentially, he represents the one where war is just a stimulant. There's nothing to worry about. Wars won't happen. And he represents sort of the majority opinion in England that everything would be fine and not to worry. We just have to kind of keep calm through this. And so he's the one who's saying, like, let's pay attention to Christmas. Let's ignore all of these warnings. Whereas Raymond Massey is very, very alarmed. Now, some people feel that Raymond Massey's performance is over the top, but I think it's absolutely perfect for this film. I think that Raymond Massey is an ideal choice to play both versions of Cabal, John and his grandson Oswald. So, and then Noel, they're singing the Christmas carols, and it's fun because for those of us who celebrate Christmas, all of this stuff is very, very familiar. The Christmas tree, the Christmas carols, and yet the toys are war toys. The helmet for the little boy, the drum. There's a cannon that the old man is holding and talking about. Perhaps these toys are too much of a stimulant, and then Raymond Massey is still worried about war, concerned about war, even during the Christmas celebrations. Now it's also fun. Something you can see in the colorized version that Ray Harryhausen oversaw. And again, this is on YouTube too, so I would encourage you to watch the colorized version as well. It's clear that there are candles on that Christmas tree. So that's again, something that's really fun to notice. And now William Cameron Menzies, of course, is the director of this film, and as I'd mentioned previously, he was a production designer on many of the great films of the Golden Era. And so he had been the production designer on Thief of Baghdad, starring Douglas Fairbanks Sr. He later, for the Cordas, would be the production designer on the later Thief of Baghdad, made in the 40s with Conrad Veidt, and Sabu, another great film in very, very vibrant color. And he was also the production designer on Gone with the Wind. And he was a director on very few films, but this one and Invaders from Mars are two great science fiction films. And his compositional eye is terrific. If you look, every single shot is well composed. It's very possible he drew storyboards for all of this. I mean, he was very good at drawing and all of the things that an artist would need. Now, this is a wonderful shot where the tree fades to darkness, and it's wonderful with the shadows behind it. It's just a beautiful shot. Then you come out into the courtyard. Now, this was at the time the most expensive film that had ever been shot in England. And again, they come out and there's the searchlights going. Now again, this seems so prophetic because in 1940, in September of 1940, the Blitz started with the bombing campaign on England from the Nazis, and so these searchlights, all of this stuff, all of these scenes that we're about to see, were a very familiar sight through 1940 and 41, and so again, just really terrible things happening, and every Londoner was afraid of this future, afraid that this would happen. Though Wells, of course, being a science fiction writer, said, well, one of the principal questions we ask as science fiction writers is, what if? And so what Wells is proposing is, what if the war just kept going? And what would be the logical outcome of that? And this is, of course, where it's like, an air raid, a test during Christmas? No, of course not. So he goes in and turns in, and it's like, oh my God, there's, mobilization. They're calling out the troops. And everyone's horrified. But, Passworthy is, well, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe we'll be okay. Then they run inside, turn on the radio. Now, this is, of course, television. There was television at this point, but most people did not have it. There were not national broadcasts. It was mainly like hobbyists. The same as radio had been in the early days, where it was mainly hobbyists building their own radios. That was the same with television at this point. The progress of television was stalled because of World War II, so you didn't get active TV broadcasts or widespread TV broadcasts until after the war, the late 40s into the 50s, though the Nazis actually had television broadcasts that they had in the military hospitals. So they actually filmed shows that were then shown on televisions in the hospitals for the wounded soldiers. So there's actually a documentary on Nazi television which you can find again online, and which is very, very interesting. Here they're hearing, there's damage to the fleet, and they're all reacting with dread. He says, well, here's your stimulant, Passworthy. War has come. And again, you get a feeling that John Cabal wouldn't be a great fun at a party, but but he is the voice of the real world. He is the voice of, saying this is the terrible waste of war. And Wells, of course, having studied and written about the history of man, knew that war had always been with us, and the incredible destructiveness of it. And of course, having lived through World War One, everyone watching this film who was an adult remembered World War One, had either served in it. The losses in England were huge, and no one wanted another war. This was something terrible, a terrible specter. But now you see, and again, all these scenes were so prophetic, because this is exactly what London would look like in just 3 short years as they entered World War II. I mean, we entered World War II officially. America did, December 7th, 1941, when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Though Roosevelt was an ally, very much an ally to England, and doing whatever he could prior to that. But there were very strong forces in America that didn't want to enter this war. But here we have the soldiers coming in on motorcycles, and we get to see the aftermath of the parties earlier, the revelers. So we still have the rich people coming off of their party and so forth. And now, great fear was, because World War I, they used poison gas, mustard gas, etc. And the fear was that gas would be used in the coming war, in World War II. But interestingly enough, because Hitler had been a soldier in World War I and had been gassed, he was very opposed to using poison gas in war, and in fact didn't use it. He used poison gas to exterminate the Jews and the gypsies and so forth, and the gay people in the concentration camp Zyklon B. But gas was not used during the war. For the most part. So that fear that's in this movie didn't come to fruition, but the bombing, the death, the buildings exploding, all of that. And again, this is a brilliant sequence. In some cases, it's over-cranked, where so people are moving more quickly, and then we see Cabal's son and the wife. And the role of women in this film is very interesting, because she's sort of like, were we wrong to have this child? It's like, no, we were right. And again, he's in an RAF uniform, and in the colorized version, that uniform is blue, which was true of the aviation uniforms in England and in Germany as well. And so again, it's like, well, we have to have kids, we have to keep the world going, and he doesn't regret that, and he's reassuring her. Though she's, of course, one of the least interesting female characters in the movie. Roxanne is much more interesting, and we'll get to that when we get to her. But of course, establishing that they have a child then pays off when we learn that his grandson, Oswald Cabal, is leading the future society. But again, every shot, the lighting, the composition, you just have a sense of an artist's eye in what William Cameron Menzies is doing. The fog, there was a lot more fog in London back then because of pollution and other factors, and coal fires and so forth. So if you go to London now, it's not nearly as foggy. They used to talk about peace supers, and of course Sherlock Holmes is famous for the London fogs. But now here's Passworthy with this little boy in the little drum he was given for Christmas, a little helmet, and Passworthy's in the Home Guard, so he's not mobilizing, whereas of course Cabal is joining the Air Force, the RAF, and but now it's like we have this thing of like, start drumming for the march, and the little boy's drumming, and then we see these soldiers in this great sequence where we see their gigantic shadows as the little boy plays the drum. And again, these giant shadows of soldiers, there were other films that had done this before. There were many films about World War I. You would also see it in some of the Busby Berkeley musicals in the 30s too. There's a great sequence called My Forgotten Man that again has the soldiers in big shadows like that. Now the London Underground, again, just a few short years from now, they would be using the underground for air raid shelters. And though at one point, one shelter, it was hit and flooded the underground tunnel, and everyone was drowned. And it was, there were large loss of lives. 40,000 people died in the Blitz, which ran from September of 1940 to May of 1941. But this is all very, very, this would have been an exact reality. And then they're handing out gas masks, and everyone's running. And this is again a callback to the earlier shots where you saw these cars pull up for the Christmas parties, and but again now people are panicking, and again some of the shots are quicker than others. And then again these gigantic guns, that's exactly what you had in London, and the firemen, St. Paul's would be hit and during the war, and a lot of what we're about to see, this is the war beginning, and so the nightmare comes. And a lot of the people you see, it's great because William Cameron Menzies goes from these wonderful close shots of the people's faces to these wide shots. Now this entire thing, everything you're seeing, all these buildings, this was a set. This was an exterior set that was built by Corda. And here's a great combination where the theater blows up, and you have a combination of the model blowing up, and then underneath you have the people, being covered by all the rubble. So this is a great mixture of miniature work and live action pieces that were added to the shot. Phenomenal. And again, this is 1936. This is the cutting edge of visual effects in 36. And all of these shops and movie theaters are being destroyed. And this is exactly like what London would have been during the Blitz. If you could take this film and intercut it with actual newsreel footage of the Blitz, and you wouldn't be able to tell which is which. And but again, the party goers are like, here's a guy raising his fist and being blown up. And then, and again, it's just a great montage of, background, mid-ground, foreground, to really present this as every town is destroyed. Now, but this was an enormous set that was built, exterior set that was built. And so basically they start with it in its complete form, and then it's destroyed and becomes every town in the middle part of the show where everything has gone back to the Middle Ages, essentially. And again, as a science fiction story, nothing like this had ever been done before. This is Wells's reaction to Metropolis and the other great science fiction film of the 20s. And watching both of them back to back is not a bad idea, because it really is call and response in its way. Now we pan down, we see the little boy dead in the rubble. And again, for the audience watching in 1936, this would have been horrifying, because there was really the question, as we developed air power, of whether civilians should be targeted or not. And more as we moved into World War I, Hitler was advancing the idea of total war, which was there's nothing off the table, there's nothing that's not allowed. And whereas before, bombing civilians was considered a war crime, by the time we get to World War II, and the Blitz and so forth, then both sides are bombing civilian targets. Though again, the Allies are trying primarily to bomb military targets, but again, there's a lot of civilian loss of life. And as the war continues, you get the bombing of Dresden and other civilian targets, with the idea of just basically, reducing the enemy to rubble and ashes. Now we have the war continuing, and we go from tanks that were common at that time to futuristic tanks, and so we're starting to get that science fiction feel. And now those are the White Cliffs of Dover, and that would become a very famous song by Vera Lynn during World War II. Blue skies over the White Cliffs of Dover. And I've actually seen those cliffs when I took the ferry from England to France, and they're white and very distinctive. And then again, the model work in this film is terrific, and because again we have squadrons of airplanes flying over the channel, and Hitler, the armistice of World War I decreed that Germany was not to have any standing military, no weapons of war, and Hitler slowly but surely started defying that, bending the rules, ultimately rearming, because he was intent on world conquest. He was elected in 1933, and of course died ostensibly in 1945. We could talk about that a little bit, but this is the enemy fleet over the homeland, which is of course England. Now Hitler's planes were built with parts and fuel formulations from American firms and other firms, and initially, and his planes were the most advanced in the world. So you see that here the British forces are flying biplanes, sort of vestiges of World War I, whereas the enemy has a more advanced plane, not a biplane, a single wing construction. And this was very much like the planes that we would see in World War II, though as you notice there's no markings, because although everyone watching this would have known that these were Germans, it's never overtly said, and Hitler is never overtly named, but this was very, very clear what this was to anyone watching it. So and we have Cabal in the plane, and of course, and again, this is a mixture of rear projection, a mixture of model work, a mixture of actual airplanes in the air, very skillfully done. And so you'll go from a shot of a plane crashing to a model crashing, then a real shot of a biplane flying, and then Cabal pulls up, and then we're back, to the studio, to shooting our exteriors on location. So the biplane pulls up, and again, Cameron Menzies really loves to have foreground, midground, background in shots. That's a compositional favorite of his. And again, we have the enemy soldier, who's badly injured, and Cabal is trying to save him. And this somewhat speaks to the camaraderie of soldiers that you did see among aviators in World War I, and then of course that would largely fade away in World War II, but as atrocities mounted up. But this is and here's Cabal saying, why do we have to kill each other? And the enemy soldiers, they're basically agreeing that war is a bad idea, and the gas is coming, and this is the gas that the enemy soldier dropped, and Cabal gets out the enemy soldier's gas mask. His idea is to save this guy, but then of course the little girl comes running, and Wells is speaking to the irony of war, where people who normally would have compassion are on opposite sides of the war trying to kill each other, and the enemy soldier, initially Cabal is going to sacrifice himself to save the little girl, but the enemy soldier insists that his gas mask be used. So again, this is speaking toward, we're all human beings, why are we doing this? It's insane. It's the forces of barbarism and chaos against the forces of humanity and compassion. And as Cabal heads off, he thinks of the soldier and tosses him his revolver so the soldier won't be killed by the poison gas, which is incredibly painful, but can shoot himself. And the soldier gives him a last salute, and he talks about the irony of maybe I killed her whole family, and yet I just gave up my gas mask to save her. That's a joke. That's funny. And again, what saves this film for me in many ways, because it is very much a soapbox kind of film, is the humanity, the different plays of character. I find this film very inventive and very, very interesting, and I think its speculations are very, very interesting. And again, the people watching this, England had a history of war going back as far as, recorded history and recorded time. And so, although World War I went from 1914 to 1918, there had been the 100-Year War in England's past, and the War of the Roses, and many wars that lasted a very, very long time. So the idea of a war that would keep going for decades was not that out of the realm of possibility. So now we're continuing on, and the years go by, and we see more and more futuristic tanks. 1945. Now, for those of us watching after the war, we know 1945 was the end of the real World War II, but this war keeps going to 1955 and 1960. So now we start seeing that it's getting more and more medieval, that basically the war is causing a fall of civilization, and beautifully demonstrated with the wood wagon with the big wooden wheel and the body vanishing from the barbed wire. And again, for those who had survived World War I, a lot of these visions would have been familiar, but again, the devastation to England, all of these things, this was, very, very frightening. And we see, earlier we saw the newspaper, well printed, very, very orderly. Now we're starting to see that civilization is going backwards, and the printing is much more uneven. And it's talking about the wandering sickness. Now, of course, we're recording this during a pandemic, so the wandering sickness seems very familiar to us. But it was, again, a great idea of Wells, because again, in World War I, you had the war followed by the pandemic, the worldwide pandemic of influenza that had killed so many people. Everyone watching this probably would have had someone that they knew who had died from that flu. And so now we're back in the Middle Ages. Everything's kind of rough, but this is all set within that same Everytown set, which has been reduced to ruins. And again, for anyone who had grown up in Europe, there were Roman ruins all over the place, ruins from the Roman Empire in England, in Europe. And so now you have these wonderful, the narration saying about the wandering sickness. And of course, anyone who's seen Star Wars recognizes this trick of the scrolling narration. And but now we go to Everytown, and this is where we see it totally devastated after decades of that. And then we see someone who has the wandering sickness, and they have these wigs that, where people's hair is kind of scraggly and crazy. And again, people had seen the devastation of war, and everyone's reduced to rags. And this again calls up the Middle Ages very much. And you see the devastation of every town, but you can still recognize the cathedral. You can recognize the facades of stores. And then now we see the doctor, and he's older now, and that's his daughter, played by Ann Todd, who was a very well-known actress of the period, blonde-haired, blue eyes. But the doctor, although he's a young actor, he's playing age well, and the whole notion of we've gone too far back, you can't get supplies, you can't get equipment. It's the plague just has to take its course. We're not able to beat it back, which again, those of us living through the pandemic, this is, definitely we can identify with this. And you see the remnants of the street signs, and so again, there's that tie to the modern age, but again, you can see how it's devastated. I mean, again, William Cameron Menzies' eye for composition is so terrific and detail. Now for the first time, we see Ralph Richardson. Now he's going to become the boss, essentially the warlord. And you see, if you look closely, he's got his military tunic on under his clothing. So clearly he was in the military. And, and you have, still have modern rifles. This guy gets shot and he falls, and the idea is, again, barbarism, where we can't cure people, we can't treat people, we can't even be humane, and the rise of barbarism. And this is where we meet the young man, and introduce the romance between Ann Todd and him, and he'll figure, of course, into the story as it continues. And you'll notice there's a certain similarity of the heroic look of these thin, handsome young men, and I like the fact that William Cameron Menzies knows when to go to close-ups. His cutting style is very elegant. And then we go to the hero's sister, and she's got the wandering sickness. Oh my God, what will we do? And again, for those who had lived through the 1918 epidemic, which lasted for 3 years, one of the key features of that was fever and delirium, and people would wander, and, out of their minds, totally delirious. And so this would all be very familiar to people who had lived through that period. And this is before antibiotics, this is before penicillin. So, by World War II, you got sulfa drugs that were helpful, but the chance of dying when you caught different diseases was much higher then than it is now. And so this would all be very, very familiar to everyone watching this film at the time. And again, William Cameron Menzies has a great sense of dark to light. So in all of his film, every shot you see wonderful lighting. Now unfortunately, the prints tend to be second or third generation prints, so they're not as pristine as we'd like. For instance, there was a Hal Roach version of Things to Come that was released on video, on VHS videotape, and that was a much cleaner print for some reason. I haven't seen it ever since, but you're not going to see any print of this that's going to be absolutely perfect. But then Ralph Richardson grabs and shoots the woman, and so despite her brother pleading for her life, he said, "That's what you got to do. You got to shoot him." So this shows Ralph Richardson as a decisive and cruel man, a merciless man. Now it's 1967. And we're coming to the mid part of the story, the Middle Ages, the sense of civilization having fallen to ruin and barbarism having taken its place. And this film very much is, its thesis is, we have a choice between barbarism and sanity, and it's up to us, each of us, to make that choice. Now, ironically, of course, World War II, the Brits, in a certain way, didn't have a choice because Hitler was intent on conquering the world. And fortunately, they stood the challenge, and Winston Churchill was the right man to be prime minister during the war. Wells lived through the entire war. Interestingly enough, when he wrote Things to Come and when they were shooting it, he was 70 years old. So he had started as a young man writing in the 1890s, but now we're 50 years later, and he's, we're 1936, and so he's an older man looking back at the body of his work and synthesizing it into this film. So all of the science fiction writing, all the historical writing, all the philosophical writing melds in this film. Now there is a big difference, which is that Wells in his early novels tended to be very, very, very pessimistic. War of the Worlds, Time Machine, Island of Dr. Moreau, very dark films. Sorry, they were made in films, but they're very dark novels. Here, he's saying there is hope, there is possibility for a better outcome, but we're always going to have chaos, the possibility of chaos with us. Now here we see the medieval life. We see babies getting washed in tubs, in barrels, and Jay Adams. We see it's a shop, but it's actually the remnant of a 2-decker bus. And we get this great scene about the Rolls Royce, where at first the guy's talking about, well, it's a Rolls Royce, and we used to go 100 miles in a day and not even think about it. And you're thinking, well, and he says the engine still turns over, and you're thinking, well, it's a car. And these wigs are a little bit curious. They're like caveman wigs or something, but I like the costuming. I like the fact that people just throw stuff together. Everything is in rags. And he's talking about how, well, this still turns over. And then, of course, the gag is that, when he finally gets in and drives away, it's being pulled by a horse, and so, again, it's very, very fun that, that's and that the wheels are bare. They don't have a tire on them. But so we're basically, showing the life in this place, and it feels like a real place. It feels like you get to see the shops and the daily lives of people, and then we have the army coming back victorious, and this is the chief, the boss, Ralph Richardson. Now, Ralph Richardson would be a very famous actor throughout his career. He was a Shakespearean actor. He was on the stage in Pinter plays and all sorts of things. He was in a lot of movies. You can see him in many, many films. He and John Gielgud were very dear friends, and there was sort of a core of British actors that would do stage and film and radio. And Laurence Olivier was another of those. But here it's great. The score is really working with this triumphal march, and you get a sense of they're reduced to horses. There's horse and foot. There's no running cars, and they're trying to get planes going, but planes don't exist in their world. But again, you see people are living in the ruins, and now he gets off. And again, it's gone back to this medieval feeling. So although he's still wearing his uniform, he's got this fur over vest, and he's got the decorations on his helmet, and he's saying, "Oh, your wife, you hide her well, don't you?" And it's the whole notion is that he's like kind of a womanizer. He's sort of the local warlord. And again, Wells told him not to pattern his performance on any of the current dictators, but he's very consciously doing Mussolini, who was much more of a big, blustery kind of blowhard kind of character than Hitler, who was more refined in his way, of course, more of a monster. But fascism was the coming thing. There were in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, the fascists had won, and so there was that question. Now we meet Roxana, and she played by Margaretta Scott, and she's great. And the tailor behind her is Abraham Sofair, who was an actor who was in many, many movies and TV shows. He would later be in a Twilight Zone episode called The Mighty Casey, where he was the inventor of a robot ball player. But here he is in a very small role as a tailor, a Jewish tailor. And but Margaretta Scott again is this wonderful, medieval concubine, priestess kind of. She's the female offset of Ralph Richardson, and again, I think she's a wonderfully written role, wonderfully acted. She's attractive, she's interesting, she's got energy and enthusiasm. Really cool. Now they look up and they see Cabal's plane, and it's this very cool futuristic plane. And again, the futuristic designs are terrific. They would strongly influence science fiction film and real world design for decades to come. If you ever see Sky Captain, you can see exactly what the inspiration is in this film. But again, this thing comes out of the sky, and that's all model work. But they built some full-size copies for Cabal to climb out of and so forth. But and you can see the people wearing their headdresses, very reminiscent of the French Revolution. While we were wasting time, they were busy. And it's like, go see who that is. So the idea is that somewhere in the world there's someone building new airplanes, not just trying to cobble together airplanes from pieces. And you can notice that again, there's this wonderful refinery and decoration that's from whatever comes to hand. So for instance, if you look at Roxana's jewelry, it's coins. It's made out of coins, gold coins. And so that's very, very fun. And so again, their finery is what's cobbled together. But here's Cabal, and we don't know who's flying the plane yet. That's this incredible Art Deco design, terrific. And then he rises up, and he's got this great radio tube kind of helmet, and that matches the plane, and he's in black. So again, unlike all of the other people who are cobbled together and kind of rough and ready, he's got a uniform. And it's funny because there is a fascistic quality to his uniform and to the Wings Over the World notion. There is a certain look to it, but it's still terrific. It's absolutely wonderful. And Raymond Massey, of course, was a fairly young man at this point, but they put him in the white hair, and he just looks great. He's able to play the age very, very well. And again, this inspired futuristic design, the shoulders, the look of this was very, very influential. And again, we shoot him on up shots, on up angles. He's tall, and you can see here in this shot, he's composed where he's taller than everyone else. So the notion is, he's the authority, he's the power, he's the scientist, the wise one, and that there's a quality, and yet he's in his own way almost as ruthless as the boss, as the chief, Dr. Harding. And so then I seem to remember you. Why you're John Cabal. And so again, we see that he's the character that we met earlier at the Christmas party on that evening. And yet both of them are playing age very well. They're not overdoing it, but they're just totally credible. And again, I urge you to watch the colorized version because it will pick out details in a lot of these shots that you don't notice otherwise, because the shots are very, very detailed. And you can see, again, the letters from the bombed buildings, all of that. And it's like, well, where have you come from? What are you doing? And again, he's under arrest, but he always is basically dismissive of what the boss is trying to do, or what you're under arrest. Well, nevertheless, you're whether you like it or not, you're under arrest. Well, he doesn't really care about that. He's serving a larger purpose, and so as a result, he's, what happens to him doesn't really matter as much to him. He's not afraid of dying. And then we go to the grand domed interior, which is now the boss's headquarters. But she's the one who really rules things. She's the one who's smart. She says, well, you can't go to him. He must come to you. She's the one who's the governing influence on him. He's always blustery. He's always taking it too far. She's really running things in a certain way. Very, very smart. And but again, Cabal is saying, well, we've got Wings Over the World in Basra, where we're going. The scientists have banded together to clean up the world and bring sanity back to the world. So he's he had played John Brown in a movie as well, and he's very good at playing sort of fanatics, and yet there's something so exciting. Again, this is before World War II, and scientists were held in higher regard. This is before you had the concentration camps and the death camps and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all of these wonders of science that made the world nightmarish. And so again, scientists were the hope, and in Wells's view, they were the hope of the future, that if we just listened to them, all would be well. And so it's very questionable. I mean, the world that Wells postulates as what would have come would have probably been a terrible world as well. But now, again, we're positing, it's great because they have Cabal as this tall, angular figure. He's got such power in every scene. He commands every scene. And it's fascinating because and having Roxana in such a powerful position, she's the one who's observing, she's the one who's listening, and she's drawn, of course, to power. So she's attracted to Cabal as well. And she's always sort of saying, okay, where should my loyalties lie? Who's going to win? And she knows very, very quickly that Cabal is a breath of fresh air, but also a great threat to the world that she's living in, because she has, she's living as privileged a life as one can in that world. And again, you notice the smoke in the background. He's always composing his shots very, very, very interestingly. There's always something to beguile the eye, and it's never overly busy, but it's always detailed. And then this is where the boss is trying to strike a deal. He's trying to say, well, we need a victorious peace. He's using a lot of the rhetoric that the fascists were using, because it was the forces of dictatorship against democracy. And you also had the Soviet Union, communism, also Stalin being a threat too, with the rule of the state. There was the notion of democracy, which favored the rights of the individual, versus fascism and dictatorship, which favored the power of the state and erased the rights of the individual. And so, so again, he's talking. So Cabal is talking about sanity, law and sanity, and the boss is basically the voice of fascism and dictatorship, and it's a really interesting debate because these are two extremely good actors, and Roxana being a woman of her time, the men speak and she's quiet but observing, and you can see her watching. I mean, it's wonderful, to see these scenes because you can see the power play and the script really comes alive in these scenes between these characters, because the great thing about Ralph Richardson, he does such a wonderful job because his character is in a strange way almost likable because he has such enthusiasm and such variety in his performance, and it offsets the dryness of Raymond Massey, the rigidity of Raymond Massey's character. And so it's fun to watch them play against each other. Richardson was a very, very, very good actor, and even into old age, he kept his skills, and so you see that the two of them can't survive in the world together. It's both of them know that one of them is going to win, and that the other, it's two different worldviews. They can't both exist. There's no peace to be made between them, and so that's very fun. And so then with Raymond Massey's character basically telling him, well, we're going to clean you up, we're going to get rid of you, and it's like, well, we shall see. And Ralph Richardson maintains his defiance. And so it's great. And then we get to see all these little other rooms, the bedroom, which again, these are rooms that were serving other purposes. And then Roxana comes in and she's like, was that wise, bullying him? And it's just, she's the one always trying to say, okay, what's the smart thing? What's going to work? What's going to keep us in positions of power? And yet, Ralph Richardson understands that there isn't this. There's no accommodation to be made. That he only has one bag of tricks, which is domination. And so if he doesn't dominate, he's not going to go anywhere. Now, also, interestingly enough, in the Criterion cut of this film, because the film is significantly cut down, there are a couple of extra scenes which we'll talk about that are not in this print, but if you seek out the Criterion disc that just came out a couple of years ago, there's 2 more scenes in that one. But here she's saying, is it wise to bully? Is it wise to do these things? And they're disagreeing, because Ralph Richardson basically says, look, we can't. You're a woman. You're trying to reason this out. You're trying to find a way to maneuver. There is no way to maneuver other than force, and so it's fun. It's fun because what could be just dry political arguments don't come across that way, because the characters are so good. Because the actors are so wonderful. And actually Wells's writing here is really, really good. He's a sexist in his interesting way, but also liked strong women. He had many affairs and marriages to very strong women. And of course, the character of Weena in Time Machine is a very interesting character. And I think Margaretta Scott is terrific in this film, where she talks about loving the chief, admiring him. She's drawn to power. And so then here's where they have the raid on the to get the oil, to get the fuel. And again, this was a real facility in England. This was a location shoot. And and again, they still have guns, they still have munitions, but they don't have machines. And so they haven't gone back to bow and arrow, but you can see that it's very much, like trench warfare. But again, it's, guns and horses. It's still the boss is, but it's funny because it's barbarism, where instead of it being a war between countries, it's now a war between counties. And so it's the hill people. We will be victorious over the hill people, which would have just been like the outlying, suburbs back in the day, So that's, fun, very fun. And again, and you can see that Wayne Cameron Menzies is trying to find variety. So he has two scenes of the boss riding in on horseback. So he chooses to stage one during the day and one at night for visual variety. And we are now victorious, and he's still, and his goal is to get airplanes up and flying again. So he comes back victorious, and the scene that's missing in this cut is he has a banquet. and he's kind of, coming on to one of the girls at the banquet, and Margaret Scott's character is, tired of his antics and goes down to talk to Cabal. So that's the difference in this print. You don't see that scene. Here he's just trying to bully, the young flyer and the doctor, Dr. Harding, to make him fuel and make him poison gas. And so again, we see him trying to strong-arm people, and it's, whereas by now there's the plan in our young aviator's mind to get things, to make an escape, to save Cabal, because he sees the promise of the larger world. But again, we have a lot of visually interesting things here. We've got cool stuff in the foreground, and it's much fog, smokier and gray in the background. So again, we're dealing with a depth to these scenes, a physical depth. But then it goes to close shots, and and again, with Ralph Richardson's character saying, "I want those planes. You'll do what I say," and so he's but the aviator knows that he can strike a bargain, that he needs Cabal, and so he's and the doctor and I've had a little bit of a disagreement, because again, the doctor is unyielding, and the boss is the threat. The boss always has is that he can kill people, but he knows if he kills people, that he's lost, because that loses the possibility that he sees. He needs these scientists, these mechanics, but he is afraid of them. He recognizes the threat because they're smarter than he is. He's a brute, and he knows that he's always afraid that they will get the better of him. And so, but the Dr. Harding is saying, "I won't help you in any way, shape, or form." So the aviator knows that he has to get Harding to help, because together they can stage the escape. But he's got to play this very, very carefully, because otherwise the boss will cotton on. And of course, Roxana is smarter than the boss. She keeps her silence and observes. So she's So it's very fun. It's very fun. I'll have nothing to do with gas. And he's saying that the state is the totality of your obligation. It's again. And for everyone, and the forces of fascism were also active in America, active in England. There were movements in America, the German-American Bund. There were Nazi parties, trying to undermine the British as well. And so there was always the possibility during the Depression, because everything got thrown on its head during the Depression, that the fascists would take over in America, in England. And in fact, there's a great book, The Plot Against America, by Philip Roth, which has just been done as a miniseries on HBO, which shows if Lindbergh had run for president, he wanted to stay out of the war. He admired Hitler. It was not that out of bounds as a possibility. And so Wells is he's projecting a future, but it's not an impossible future. It's not an outlandish future. And so again, this is very much where it could all have happened. It could all have happened. And so again, the doctor, in the scheme of things, if Cabal had not arrived, in all likelihood, the boss would probably have killed the doctor ultimately. He would have gotten beyond himself. Now, this is where, the Dr. Harding doesn't realize, that there's a plan afoot. He's a little bit slow on the uptake, and shouldn't be. But then this is the aviator striking a bargain, you're Edward, So, but it's and she's watching. It's fun to watch Margaret Scott in these scenes, listening and seeing the play of emotions on her face as she's thinking about things, and she's reasoning and seeing how this could all work. So she's. And she's. I tell you that, as I told you, my dear, you're too hard with people. You have to, you have to reward them as well. So again, she's the voice of moderation, and but now's the scene with Cabal. Now this scene is cut down from how it was actually filmed, and so there's some interesting compositional jumps. But this is again a lovely scene. And I wrote a version, an episode of Sliders called. World Killer, that has a boss, that has an alternative world that goes back to barbarism, and I had a character of the boss in mind that was a tip of the hat to this. But one thing you like to do when you're writing strong characters is to shake up the combinations. So this is the scene where she finally gets to talk one-on-one to Cabal, and it's so fun. And again, Wells's worldview, he's thought about this world, and it's very fun because it's like, well, I can read. Before they shut down the schools, I could read, and I know about these far places, but I didn't know there was a world outside this world. And still, he brings a breath of something larger, and she's drawn to it. Now, this actually, interestingly enough, is the counterpoint structurally to the scene with Rowena that Elaine and I just did for you guys, because it's she's talking about her imagination, what women are like, and so this was meant as the scene that then would be counterpointed in the scene between Oswald and his ex-wife. So it's fun, but there's so many interesting bits and pieces in this, because he's rather attracted to her. If this is actually a love scene, a seduction scene almost, because you have a sense that if he said to her, "Come fly away with me," she'd do it. If you were free and if I was free, and it's it's fun. It's very, very fun, because it's like, I'd like to take you and show you all these places. You'd fly in a matter of hours to these places. And again, her finery is so interesting, the flowers in her hair and the cloak and everything kind of cobbled together, whereas his uniform is this black stark thing, and the one candle, which is great. That's the and then what are you going to do to this boss of mine? It's great, because it's like, well, what more important is what he's going to do to me, something violent and foolish if I don't stop him. So you get the sense that she knows that she's the power. She knows that she can affect things, and she's drawn to this guy. Now the fun part is, so she's left the banquet that was not in this version. She's left the banquet angry at this womanizing, and they've set up his womanizing. Clearly the boss is cheating on her and has other affairs and so forth, and she knows that, and he's sort of a drunken lout and a bully. And this man, she's getting the measure of Cabal, and she's trying to see where she stands in the equation as well as where the chief stands. She says, "I love the chief," but you have a sense that there's other possibilities. Now he comes in drunkenly, and we don't know why he's drunk, because we haven't seen the banquet scene. She says, "Well, you've been up there, partying and so forth," and now he says, "Well, and then she covers. She's saying, "I was down here with this cold, dark man. Do you think I wanted to talk with him? I was trying while you were having fun. I was trying to find out what he wants with us. He's come from Basra, so that's it's really fun, because it's like she's both Cabal and Margaret Scott. She says, well, she's been giving me quite a grilling. They're both. It's really fun because they had this sort of romantic, almost flirtatious scene, but he's covering for her. So they're basically both creating a fiction, which is she came down to interrogate him. She really interrogated him. She was just serving the boss's aims, right? And so, but that's also true, because she was trying to find out. And Cabal knows that, that he's not safe. He could easily die. The likelihood is he would die. But she's now saying, he's right. He's right. We should side with him. We should agree to his demands. But of course, the boss is never going to surrender. He can't, because that would be the loss of power. He's not going to. There's no room for him in this world that Cabal is building. So now you get the two of them talking again, and the boss is afraid of this future that the Cabal is bringing in, the technology Cabal is bringing. But it's like, we'll see. And again, the thesis of the film is, will brutality overwhelm reason? And we see, and in this shot, the boss is taller, and then he kills the flame. Now, of course, in those days you couldn't illuminate a scene by candlelight, so that's the lights are timed to go down when the candle is extinguished. And it's fun that Ralph Richardson extinguishes that flame with his hand. Think about that, Mr. Wings over the world. So now we go to this fun scene where they're working on the biplane. They can't get to Cabal's plane, so they're going to have to stage the escape this way. And it's very funny, because the way this is composed is like, how is it possible that guard didn't hear they're talking about an escape? I guess they have the deaf guard behind him, because if he was really that close, he would have heard that. Well, now the way to get away, the oil line's leaking. So that was staged a little funkily, but okay, fine. And now we have, well, that's your man. He's flying again. Okay, and he makes the flight to Basra, which I think is in Iraq, if memory serves. But again, this is so fun, because here's Ann Todd with Margaret Scott, and the idea that in a strange way they're almost friends, or at least friendly. They talk to each other. She's not there in a scene, to threaten her. She's just basically talking to her. Now we see the future world. Now we see what these airmen are building, these scientists, and it's a spectacular shot. This enormous bomber. And again, this is where we get to this cool science fiction 1930s design. Incredible. And all of these airmen in their black. It's just so cool and scary. I mean, I wouldn't want to face these guys. And, but it's fun, this huge bomber with this wing. And it's funny because there's a later film made in the 50s starring Jimmy Stewart called Strategic Air Command, and it's got a shot of a modern bomber like a B-52 with that enormous wingspan. So, but again, this is very early, and they had, the Nazis were building bombers. They just bombed Guernica, but this was a future vision that didn't exist. There were no planes that looked like that, and so it's really spectacular. And that's like, wait, he didn't fall into the sea. He got across. He got to the bad guys. They're coming. Okay, well, so fine. Now, of course, notice that the chief, of course, sleeps alone. He has his own bedroom, as on theory does Margaretta Scott. So so again, we're seeing his life. He's always kind of rumpled also, which is fine, and he's always kind of a little bleary. He's very, you can see many of his qualities in a certain leader that we have now. Again, not to get political, but that impulsiveness, that sense of the cult of personality, the sense of he's the show, he's the guy in charge, and whatever he says goes. And when he's defied, he has very, very little patience. He's always in a state of irritation and short-temperedness, and also there's a physicality to the character that's very, very fun. And you have a sense that Ralph Richardson really enjoyed playing this role, because he brings such variety and such energy and such bravado to it. And again, they have him in these big clothes, big robes, big furs, and again, but even his grandeur, there's always this rumpled, ruined quality to all the surroundings. So even he doesn't live in a palace that's pristine. He lives in the ruins too. But then we get to the bombers, and they're readying the bomber with their parachutes and the gas of peace. We can try the gas of peace now. And again, there is a fascist quality to this. There is, there are euphemisms that were used in fascism and that are used to this day. Peace is our profession. As a phrase for soldiers. And for victorious peace. Again, this was, for Wells, this was all, bullshit. and again, when they show people in authority or positions of power, they have low-angle shots shooting up. And again, they found these kind of wonderfully ruined walls and so forth. The sense of, the ruins, and all of England. You could go all over England, you could find Hadrian's Wall and so forth, all these ruins from the Roman Empire. So this is a callback, because the British Empire still existed when this movie was made. The British were still in control of India and many of their other colonial properties. Now this would change after World War II, but England was very much a colonial power and an empire. And the buildings, the scale of the buildings, when you go to London, you see that the Victorian buildings were very much on an imperial scale. And so again, the ruins of Rome, you get a sense of that. Now, again, here's where they look up, and the model work is terrific. They have these clouds. These are all miniatures, but that bomber is just terrific. And they start with one, and then you see three, and then you see many. And again, this is just brilliantly done. And the shot of the bomber, it's like, would something like that really fly? I don't know. Lots of propellers, guys. But it's uncanny, and it's wonderful, and it's creepy, and it's scary, and it's great. Choosing black as the dominant color of the airmen is a very interesting choice, because again, it is fascistic in its visual style, but it's also very effective and very cool looking. And this look and the look of the future guys in the final section of the film influenced what people of the future, quote unquote, would look like for many decades, even into the current age. And again, these are real airplanes here. This is a real shot of a real terrain as they're sputtering, and they put in a sound effect of these engines, missing and so forth. They're wrecks, and then you go up to the bombers, and he's saying, well, we'll take them down. They're too clumsy, big and clumsy. And our boys will be able to shoot them down. Now we see this great forward shot of the bomber, and it looks so impressive and so imposing. And it's like you're thinking these people don't have a chance. It's like those little biplanes are not going to be able to do anything against these guys. And then you start to see, and then we go to model work as these planes, and then we see the scale, which is these biplanes are teeny tiny, and the bombers are enormous. And then again. Roxana comes out in her finery with the gold coins and all of that, and the boss knows that they've got a problem because these, and it's not actually clear because the bombers don't seem to be firing on those planes, but they're going down in flames and then they're landing in defeat, and so you wonder exactly what's going on there because they don't have them. They're trying to have the airmen be kind of ambassadors of peace in their strange way. But then there's get the hostages, tie them to the stake. Then that might protect us from the poison gas. And so it's Anne Harding, and Dr. Harding and his daughter, and then the gas starts like, is that gas? And so these balls, these bombs. Now of course, in reality, the bombing that would come would be much more like the bombing in the opening of the movie. But okay, the gas, now he's going to shoot him. But she says, no, don't you understand? We're done. We've lost. She's again the voice of reason, and she's trying to save people all the time. I mean, she's someone I'd like to know. I like that character. She's great. And she says, I saved your man. I saved these people. So speak well of me. Can't you do anything to save us? Now they don't know that this isn't poison gas. They don't know, they don't know that it's the gas of peace. But this is a wonderful scene. This little scene where he's saying, what are you all doing? My head's swimming. Shoot! We're not defeated. I'm not going to be defeated. Long live the chief. And this is very cool. Again, that he's the last to go, and Ralph Richardson does a great job here. Where and again, there's something likable about this character despite everything. Because he brings such energy and such determination. And he's saying, shoot, damn you, shoot! And he's ringing the bell. And a pan over to Long Live the Chief. Background, foreground, rear projection, the clouds. It's just all, to people watching this in the 30s, it would have been just astonishing. There was nothing like this that had come before, that had been made before. And the Art Deco futurism of these designs was just a wonder. And in America, you had the pulp magazines, you had amazing stories and thrilling wonder and so forth. There's a pulp science fiction being created, the illustrations of Frank R. Paul, etc. In England, science fiction was not as thriving. That would take the emergence of Arthur C. Clarke and John Wyndham and other writers after the war. But still, this was just an amazing film at the time, and still is. So now the airmen come out, and they're taking care of the people and waking them up and so forth. The gas of peace, which it looks like it worked. And then, of course, Cabal comes out. It's a good thing I held on to my gas mask. It saved me. So I'm conscious because, of course, you want him in on this scene. So so Wells, covered that effectively, and so now we know what that does. And then it's like everyone's unconscious, fine. But this one's dead. Of course, because there was no room for him in this future world. Dead, and his world dead with him. And now the new world begins. So that's, it's again, and there's something, it's funny because from Wells' viewpoint, this was, a utopia that he was presenting, and Cabal is the good guy. But there is something kind of unyielding and creepy about Cabal as well, because he's, it's like my way or the highway, just like the chief. There are many more similarities between him and the chief than between him and a lot of the other characters. And it's interesting because also this is the last we see of those other characters in the film. And now we come to Raymond Massey. He seems like an older guy. He doesn't, that makeup on him is actually very effective. So that works well.
This is how I conceive our plan of operations. First, the roundup of brigands. At last...
And now he's talking about, here's the world we're going to build. Now, interestingly enough, they're still in their black airmen's uniforms. No one has a clothes they wear on casual Friday. It's like, no, because these guys have a vision, right? And now it goes this crazy vision of, now this is also very funny because Wells's idea was, well, it's you can get sick outside and it's messy and dirty outside. You have sunlight and wind. So of course the future world is underground, which is ironic because of course in the Time Machine he had the Morlocks underground and these ruined palaces of leisure above ground for the Eloi in Time Machine, which he wrote in 1895. Now here we are in 1936, and positing the future world, and now he starts saying, well, we're going to carve out the mountain and build our future world, and you start to have the models basically blasting mountains, and you have this wonderful music by Arthur Bliss of this sequence where the new world is being built, and this is really fun, and they hired a number of different artists and different designers to work on this sequence. There was a lot of footage that was shot that wasn't used because they were trying for it not to be exactly literal. So they have this thing, and it's very funny because now we have Elon Musk with the Boring Company where he's building these big tunnels for hyperloops and so forth. And now here we have this thing that's very similar to his boring machines, essentially blowing things up and blasting things and moving forward and making tunnels and caverns. And again, you have wonderful combinations of the model work and human beings. Yeah, so it's great mat work, great stuff, always combining the human scale so you get the sense of how large these things are, and you have these guys in kind of these spacesuits in these construction sites, and again they look great, and there's variety. So it isn't just one costume, it isn't just one machine. There's wonderful variety in this scene, and it would have been thrilling. And again, in 1939 you'd have the New York World's Fair, which would have the Futurama exhibit that showed the world in 1965, the future with highways and futuristic buildings. Norman Bell Geddes designed that, and that was again very, I think, influenced by the look of these machines and this equipment. And there was, again, futurism, the notion of a better future, that seemed very real to people in the 30s as well. It was sort of like the idea that Wells posits in this is we can have a wonderful future where people are clean and well fed and healthy and have a good future to look forward to, or war can wash it all away, sweep it all away. And of course in history that had happened because the Roman Empire had been literate and had learning and technology, and then the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, all of that fell away and people were living in the ruins of what had been. So this is a modern extrapolation of what had actually happened in the history of the people watching this film. And so this was not something so far out that the audience wouldn't have understood. They did. And again, the future is represented by machinery, by building, by construction, by the positive powers of technological innovation. So you have these generators driving machinery, and everything's turning and moving. And also there was the notion of synthetics. You had early versions of plastics at this point, Bakelite and so forth. So there was the notion that you could have synthetic materials and synthetic building materials as well. And so that's what this is about. And so again, so you have liquids that can then be used to be turned into walls and so forth. And there's toxicity and chemicals. And this is where you see that sense of it with this guy walking around LIX 893. But again, it's always, there's the foreground with the people and the background with the machinery. And so again, this is to give you a sense of scale, and it really, really works. And it's fun in the colorized version too. But and again, William Cameron Menzies is very clear on changing up the angles. So it's not just one angle. So you'll have the low angles, high angles, on and on. And there's a lot of superimposition in this scene, as well as mat work as well. I mean, there's a whole world of trickery. This thing with the behind that screen of the guy waving is very, very cool. They're being very inventive and very clever. Now this film was a nightmare to make in terms of just the difficulty of it and how expensive it was and how many challenges were in it. Because again, you have 3 sections with 3 totally different design aesthetics, and all of them are massive. And so, but I love all of this stuff. I mean, and I love the fact that, and it's funny because later, Stanley Kubrick with 2001, which was also shot in England, his film, which was probably 2001 was the next great science fiction film in the progression of science fiction films in terms of trying to say this is the future we will live in. Metropolis was the first, Things to Come the second, and you really didn't get another film that very seriously attacked the notion of where are we headed and where have we come from. 2001 was the next great one. It was strongly influenced by this film, and like this film, it breaks down into three components: the Australopithecines, the trip to Jupiter, and then finally the dawn of the next stage in humanity. And so again, like Things to Come, it's in three different pieces as well. So now we have the city being built. Now this would be a strong influence on city planners and on designers of malls for decades to come. And this is such a cool thing. I mean, they poured the liquid into the mold, cooled it then becomes a wall. Machinery drives the wall, puts it in prefabricated buildings. And again, we have prefabricated buildings now. There were buildings that were on this theory even back then. And even in the 19th century, you had prefabricated pieces that would arrive in Western towns, and you put them together, and that would be the town. But this is the technological extrapolation of that. So now we go to this hole, and boy, I don't see any guardrails. It's like, don't fall into that. Is that, it's like, looks a little dangerous to me. And this kind of, that's not the best matte painting ever, but it's but then it comes to the miniatures, and then it comes to the full-size elements. And again, once it gets to that, it's incredibly cool. And here you see it with its little monorails and clear glass elevators and people on moving walkways, and then you're down to the real people. And again, spectacular. Nothing like this had ever been done before. Now you have this gigantic sculpture, and you have Theotokopoulos. And you introduce that character, and that character is sort of the modern or the futuristic version. We're now at 2040, which is 20 years from now, interestingly enough. But Theotokopoulos is an artisan, and he's not a scientist, and he's not a visionary in that way. And he's romanticizing the past when life was short and devil take the hindmost, and he's romanticizing a past. But of course, he was probably not around back then, and so so what he's envisioning is a barbarism that is much uglier than the picture he's painting. And this all would have been done initially. These scenes would have initially been done by that guy, Ernest Thessager. And you can see again that even the costume is different. Though he's in a black and white costume, and Theotokopoulos, the first version, was all in black. So it's fun because again we're dealing with a visual scale of things. So the Cabal wears black, Theotokopoulos wears black, but Oswald Cabal wears white. And he's in a long robe. And again, the fun part is, although he's a force of chaos and a force of destruction, he's not like the Chief. The Chief is like a rather likable character in a strange way. And whereas this character is just a dark character, humorless, egotistical, a destroyer. And so not as fun. Now, I suspect that Ernst Thessiger would have brought a very different tone to this performance. And I really would have loved to have seen him. I personally think he's a better actor than Cedric Hardwicke. But, be that as it may. So now we get the little girl and the father saying, this was the age of windows, and what a shame. People had to actually be outside in the sunlight. And it's like, well, this is pretty wacky. But this clear plastic furniture, this room, this was very influential on the design in Prometheus of Charlize Theron's quarters, and also the idea of plastic furniture. There was a lot of Art Deco stuff that was along these lines, and moving forward, this was viewed as a very futuristic design. That little girl may still be alive for all we know. Hopefully she is. It'd be great fun to hear what she'd have to say about making this movie. But here we go to the grandfather and the daughter, and again in the beginning story, there's a lot of callbacks. So in the first section, we've got the grandfather at the Christmas thing saying, I wonder if this progress is too much, and war and blah, blah, blah. And now we have a grandfather and his granddaughter. And, lovelier and lovelier, just making things lovelier and lovelier. And this scene, I mentioned that there were two scenes that were added in the Criterion Disc, and this scene is the other scene that's added. It's longer, and in the longer scene, the grandfather talks about how everyone used to get a cold, and you'd sneeze, and he describes what a sneeze is like, and then he says, well, all we had to really fight all of that was our sense of humor, but it really wasn't that funny. this scene is great, and the little girl lovelier and lovelier, and but again, it's ironic to all of us who like know how dreadful it would be to live in a cave and never go out into the sun. So, but again, for the British populace who were always in very dark, dank, gray weather, the idea of artificial light and warmth and comfort was appealing. So this was not something that would have been laughed out of the room back in '36, because London was grimy and dirty and smelly and all of those things. But now we have Oswald Cabal, the grandson of the great John Cabal, and so this is the future view that Wells has, the utopian vision, and so we have Raymond Massey playing this role again, which is terrific. And that was always the idea, that the actor would be the same actor in both roles, but it's fun because the wide shoulder look became a staple of what futuristic people or aliens would wear, and you see this in many films and TV shows, including Rocky Horror Picture Show, ironically. And he had the skirt, which didn't really fly for most science fiction to come, but the wide shoulders were actually influenced by Japanese design, medieval Japanese design, and you can find versions of that, and you can see he's sort of wearing these short pants, which is kind of like a skirt. It's a strange design, and he doesn't have the best legs really, but still it's great fun. And Roddenberry, interestingly enough, on Star Trek, tried to have a uniform that was a skirt, that was a dress that men would wear, but that you only see that in a couple of episodes of Star Trek and Star Trek: The Next Generation. It really didn't fly. And then you have this wonderful wrist radio, and anyone with an Apple Watch would recognize that gizmo. And again, here we have the world of the future, and it's interesting because the notion is, how do you have a third act in this film? Because when you arrive at Utopia, it's like, well, we took care of that, and now everyone can live in the mall, and all is well. But so he has to do something to introduce another stressor. Now, of course, Wells wrote The First Man in the Moon, and of course Jules Verne wrote From the Earth to the Moon. So they both wrote, the two great science fiction writers of the 19th century were Jules Verne in France and H.G. Wells in England. And so Wells had, for him, the notion of a trip to the moon was very exciting and you started. It's really funny when you think about it, because a trip to the moon is not something that springs to mind as, well, of course we've got to send people there, but the science fiction writers working with the rocket scientists were aiming for that, no pun intended, very early on, and started to enlist the imagination of the public. So back in the 1890s, Jules Verne had a rocket, a gun that shot this capsule to the moon. Interestingly enough, Wells didn't use a gun in his novel. He had this anti-gravity stuff that was coated on a projectile, and it flew to the moon. It was called Cavorite after Cavour, who invented it. But here we go to the Cedric Theotokopoulos, which again is the real name of the painter El Greco, who painted tall, thin characters like Ernest Thessager. But now we have a broadcasting studio. Now again, television was in a very nascent form at that time. The screens were like maybe 8 inches across, or they tended to be round, and most people had never seen TV, but they all went to the movie theater. So these giant projection screens, this did not seem impossible for the future. In fact, they introduced TV at the 1939 New York World's Fair. The plan had been that there would be an active television industry in the 30s, in the late 30s into the 40s, but then World War II, of course, put a stop to all that. So it wasn't until 10 years later that you would actually start to get television, 1948, 1949. But here we have Theotokopoulos making his broadcast. I'm an artisan. I have the right to speak. It brings a very interesting question into who doesn't have the right to speak in that society. But okay, and so then he's saying, what about, we've got to stop this progress. We've got to tear it all down. And so everyone's listening. And it's very funny because Wells objected to the idea in Metropolis of the workers all being sheep who would all riot. And here there's all these masses rioting. But also it's really fun to see how this TV technology works. You've got big screen TVs, you've got the little TV that Cabal is watching, you've got a mid-sized set that couple were watching, you've got this column TV. So these are all things that actually came to pass. The notion that you could watch TV on all these different size screens and it's live television broadcasting just when he's talking. So and you see the studio with some kind of recording or broadcasting medium going by. But he's saying, enough of this progress, put an end to this progress. This space gun is an affront to nature. Okay, fine, great. And so well, we'll see what they make of it. But so that's, and then they're all saying, well, down with the space gun, down with the space gun. Great. And but so now we reintroduce Passworthy, the character that we had. He was not in the middle sequence, interestingly enough, but he's at the beginning and he's at the end. And he's basically the one who's sort of like the voice of the average guy. He's not a visionary. He's not a genius. He's not a scientist. He's not a leader, and he sort of gives voice to the doubt of everything. And again, this actor's quite wonderful, very good as an to offset Raymond Massey. It's like, well, is it so bad to stop for a while and take a breath? But Raymond Massey is unyielding as ever, Oswald Cabal. And then, of course, the Passworthy's son and Cabal's daughter show up, and that's Pearl Argyle, very, very pretty. And it's like, well, of course we have to send your son and my daughter because who better to go than the children? And so now we go to the bad guys, the intellectuals, the artists, these fools who just talk and scheme and are forces of chaos. And to be fair, it's interesting because you did have artists who were on the sides of the fascists, of the Nazis. You did have artists who were complicit with the forces of destruction and evil. So artists were not, by their very nature, they didn't have clean hands. But of course, we discover after World War II that neither did the scientists, of course. And but here we have, but now Passworthy's trying to talk the children out of going because it's dangerous, and they could be killed. And the first space moonshot, those people died. Well, we won't try and make a landing on the moon. We'll just go around it. It's like they want people who are young and fit, and we're young and fit. So great, but it's very fun. It's strange, but there is this rigidity to Cabal's stance. But on the other hand, it's a moon landing, it's a moonshot, going around the moon. Now the fun part is that this was a dream of people on both sides of the equation. So you had Tsiolkovsky in Russia, you had Robert Goddard in America as a rocket scientist shooting off rockets, you had Wernher von Braun, who had become the head of the Nazi rocket program, creating the V1 and V2. But his dream, again, was to land men on the moon and then go on to Mars. And he became a major scientist in the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo programs. So after the war, he was brought to America. But here it's like they're gonna tear down this gun. So it's this incredibly handsome guy saying, we're gonna tear down the gun. And that's of course on his actor's reel, or would have been if they'd had actor's reels back in '36. But again, it's like, well, they can do damage to it. So we have to go now. Okay, so again, this is the dramatic incident in the third act of the movie, and it's like, well, here they are. Look. Let's go to the railing. They're rioting now. There was a break actually, where there was the scene originally shot where Cabal talks to his ex-wife Rowena, who was played by Margaret Scott also. And that scene occurred. It would have been just before this scene, when they say we have to go to the gun. We have to go now. And because obviously you couldn't have had that scene after this, because then we're on the run. We're trying to stop them from destroying the gun. We're trying to fire it before they can do any damage. And the gas of peace isn't ready. We can't get the gas of peace ready. So well, maybe this is a good excuse. We could just say that we couldn't go. But of course, Cabal's not going to hear that, and the daughter and the son aren't going to hear that. And as someone who is a proponent of manned space exploration, this notion of, well, it's dangerous, but we have to do it. It's exploration. It's man expanding out into the universe. I don't disagree with that viewpoint, but again, it can seem a little over the top. But again, the model work with the live action elements, beautifully done, and then they have this great helicopter. It's the ornithopter, the gyrocopter. It's helicopters were extremely rare. They really didn't exist. You had sort of pre-helicopters that existed back then, but it's only later that you would get them. So this again is a very futuristic vehicle, and there they go, and it's flying, and it's just amazing stuff. And for any kid, any science fiction fan, this movie was just like an hour and a half orgasm. I mean, it was just like there's just so much eye candy in this, and so many wonderful things. And then you have this flight, and you get this sense of it. It feels very real. You're flying to the space gun, and there it is. And that cloud looks very real, but there it is, and it's gigantic. It's on a scale, and again, it has a gun sight, which is odd because it's a gun. It's a gigantic gun. So, and then again, you get the sense of scale. William Cameron Menzies is very aware of the size of things, and he wants to show enormous things against our scale, our small things, because again, and also Wells will have the speech at the end about we're such little animals, and it's it's the sense that can we do this? Should we be doing this? All of those questions. But fortunately, the science fiction writers working with the scientists were able to convince governments and convince the populace that something like this would actually be a good idea. It's fun that the helicopter can move a little bit forward. You can actually go on eBay and buy a model of this craft, and it's not cheap, but it's cool. And then again, we get this huge scaffolding, and beware the concussion. He's about to say that, but loading the projectile. Now, in reality, a space gun wouldn't work. It would squash and liquefy anyone inside of it because of the acceleration. So it's not a good idea. Don't build one at home, folks. But again, we're here, and the future is very white, very clean, very pristine. It's a very deliberate choice, and it's plastic and metal and very sharp lines, very Art Deco in its design aesthetic, and again, they come out and they're on this little walkway, and the model work is so well matching the miniature work. The model work and the live action work is just terrific. And they lower the projectile. Now, of course, again, when we got to the real space program, you'd have this huge rocket with this projectile on top of it. Now, in the ad copy, interestingly enough, for things to come, it said they rocket to the moon. Watch the rocket to the moon. So they didn't call it a space gun either, because even in 1936, everyone knew the space gun wasn't a good idea, wasn't going to work. But still, there's the goodbye, and they go in. There's this very thick door, which is very cool, and they shake their hands, and off they go. Now, there's actually an interesting continuity glitch here, because they strap in, to these harnesses. Again, not the greatest idea. Acceleration couches might be a better idea, but then later when they show them, they're not strapped in. So it's there were probably different versions of this sequence as well, and. But again, the lighting and all of this. Now they're in chairs. See, originally they were straps. Now there's chairs, and so intriguing. So, but there's the giant space bullet. So, and you really wonder sort of how that thing maneuvers and what the plan is. But okay, needless to say, when I was 18, I wrote a science fiction radio play called Lobotomy, which was a satire on science fiction conventions and TV shows and films. And I actually had a scene in that which was a satire of this whole sequence where I did Raymond Massey, and we were talking about a launch to the sun, and so I'll have to put that on Mr. Sci-Fi soon so you guys can hear it, because it's pretty fun. And then there's this conversation between Cabal and Theotokopoulos with these magnifying speakers. And so again, you get to have the dialogue between them, although they're not really in a physical room together. But again, and this stuff is a little more preachy than the stuff with Ralph Richardson, just because Ralph Richardson and Margaret Scott brought such vitality to their characters. Because this guy is just a stance, whereas Ralph Richardson and Margaret Scott were, I think, able to create characters, and so you have a feeling of them as people much more than Theotokopoulos. But then we have people running, and he says, beware of the concussion, and the ramp goes back, and you have this exciting music, and this is where they had live action extras, like thousands of extras. But then they were trying to figure out how they could have them running up on those ramps and stuff, and that's less convincing because they have them they had little figures on a moving walkway kind of thing, a little moving conveyor, and that looks less convincing. So, but still, they tried, and here's that same guy from earlier, and you have these wonderful things that go dark and light, very cool. And all these extras running to tear down the space gun, and so that's released. It's released the bullet. It's getting ready to go. Now you can see the conveyor belt shot. So you see that's not as, and they don't stay on it long because it's really not very convincing. But and just remember that this was the early days of visual effects. I mean, so many of the tricks that we use now, there were no computers back then. Nothing, this was, but there's again the conveyor belt, and you can see the problem is that whereas the crowds of running people are running, those, see, like here, so they're all moving at a slightly different speed. The conveyor belts are all moving at the same speed. So that, and I think they were probably aware that that was a little bit dubious. So they don't stay on those shots long, but then they go, But this is all very cool, and the control panels and all that. And these guys, those are real people climbing that, and. But again, but this is all very exciting and all very thrilling, and it's a countdown, and you have these people in the corridors and on the walkways, and they're all carrying bars of metal. They could do damage, and so then it's bang, and then it fires. So it's so cool, and I love the thing of the hydraulics going back and back and back and back. So it doesn't just fire like a gun would fire, bang. So it's more like artillery, but then. We don't see all the people being harmed. We don't see, they cut away. And then it goes to the final scene, which is this wonderful, wonderful scene of space. And then it's like, it's in an observatory, and that's a gigantic telescope. And they're looking at the view of the stars, and it's Passworthy and Cabal, which is very fun because they started the dialogue at the beginning of the movie. And here we are with their grandchildren at the end. There, that dot of light, that's them on their way to the moon. It's so, and is there never to be any time of rest? For individuals, yes, but not for mankind. And this is very much Wells's summation as a science fiction writer, his summation to his career. This is a man who changed literature. The genre of science fiction was largely defined and influenced and inspired by what he did. And this is him at the end, his credo, which is that for us to be humanity, for us to be great, we must continue aspiring and reaching out and more, the conquering the moon and then the planets, and there will never be an ending. And which shall it be? We have the choice between all or nothing, chaos or greatness. And this is something that Wells felt very, 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 very strongly. And the original title of this film, the original title of the script, was Whither Mankind, Where Shall Mankind Go? And then it became Things to Come, which is a little less unwieldy. And Raymond Massey had a problem with this performance. He felt that it was too rigid and too over the top, but I think he's great. I think he's just great in this. And, which shall it be, Passworthy? Which shall it be, all the universe or nothingness? I love this speech. It's hammy, it's goofy, but it's just so great. And such conviction. And again, you couldn't do this kind of thing today. It would be laughed out of the room. And there are many people who find this laughable, but I don't. I find it moving, and I love space travel. I love exploration, and for me this is just the greatest thing ever. And so it ends on this wonderful profile, and then which shall it be? And then and then it goes to the stars, and then you have this chorus, which shall it be? Da, da 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 da. And then it's and there are different prints of this where that goes on a little longer, a little shorter. It's there's variance, there's a lot of slight differences to these prints, but then it's like then they rise to a crescendo, and then and then it's out. So it's the end of the movie. So that's it. So in conclusion, I'll show you just a couple of things that are fun. Now the lobby cards. So the movie was shot in black and white, but as I mentioned, there's a colorized version that Ray Harryhausen, the great stop motion filmmaker, did in his later days, and that came out just a few years ago. You can find that on eBay. It's also on YouTube, and I urge you to watch it. It's really fun. But back then, although most movies were black and white, they had what were called lobby cards, and they had movie posters. Of course, you know all about those. Those were called one sheets or larger, depending on how big they were. But let me explain what lobby cards are for those of you who don't know. back in the early days of cinema, into when I was a kid in the 70s and so forth, you would go to the movie theaters to see movies. Of course, there was no television in the 30s. And so on the outside of the movie theater, they'd have movie posters. But in the lobby, and those would be in glass cases, you know, but in the lobby, they would have lobby cards. And those were images from the film that were smaller, and they would be in frames all through the lobby. And even if the film was in black and white, they were in color. They were hand colored, or basically colored by artists, and so they weren't color photographs, but they were colored, and they would sometimes give you an idea of what the colors might be if the film were in color. So let me show you some of the lobby cards from things to come. Here's a great scene when they spot the plane coming to every town, and here's when Ralph Richardson is trying to get the doctor to make poison gas for him. So you can see that. Let me see if I can angle it so it's less glary. Yeah, like that. Okay, so pretty fun. And then here's after the gas of peace has been used, and Cabal is standing over Margareta Scott. Now you notice in these lobby cards that there she is as Roxana, but on the side of the lobby card she's Rowena. There she is in her role in the later part of the movie. So, and then here is the mall, the future world, and here's the scene that was cut, which is Rowena and Oswald Cabal talking, and that's the scene that we just performed for you. And again, there's two shots of her in the scene and in the little insert there. And then we have, here's where this is where they're coming to warn that it's going to be destroyed. The mob is going to do damage to the space gun. And then here is where they bid their kids farewell as they leave, as they head off to danger and possible death or crippling. And then finally we have this. And this is the final scene. Which shall it be? All the universe or nothing. So there we are. So that's how they envision the colors in those lobby cards. And there's a few other lobby cards you can find on eBay or on Google. This is a mixture. Those are mainly from the re-release in 1947, but there's a couple of them I think that are from the original release in 36. Anyway, so that's Things to Come, one of my very favorite movies, and it's been very fun to share it with you. And H.G. Wells lived into his advanced old age, which was amazing because he was diabetic. But I think he probably felt very sad that World War II came and he wasn't able to do anything to stop it, and that the world that was emerging after the war was not going to be the world that he envisioned, and it was going to be much more complex, and that we hadn't put all the grief and all the barbarism to rest for once and all. But so that's it. If you haven't read the books of H.G. Wells, I recommend them highly. And thanks so much for watching Mr. Sci-Fi. Please donate to our Kickstarter campaign or to my Patreon account, or buy a share in Space Command. You'll be part of something wonderful. It's all this or nothingness, guys. And so which shall it be, guys? Which shall it be? Throw some dough at Mr. Sci-Fi and Space Command. So thank you very much for this time, and I've really enjoyed sharing it with you. Talk again soon. Bye.